You're listening to Over the Oxo podcast with Tracy Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians. Welcome again to today's podcast. I'm going to be doing a question and answer session again because I've still got loads of questions left. So I didn't think it was very fair to ignore such a hefty batch of questions. So thank you so much if you did send me a question. I might just use your question on another podcast, but I will get around to everybody. If you're liking the podcast, if you're getting tips and tricks, if you've seen differences in yourself or in your riding, why not contact me? Let me know. I'd love to hear your stories. Or you could easily leave me a review or click the 5 stars. That would be super duper. And if you really want to go overboard and you want to help me defray some of the costs of editing and hosting and things like that come along with having a podcast, then there's a buy me a coffee link down below. So thank you so much for all of that. Let's get on with the questions. So the first question today comes from Kerry. And Kerry says more and more to do with psychology or a combination of several factors combined with getting older. Wow. So first of all, let's take on board the becoming a new mum. There is research from the University of Tilburg in Norway to show that after giving birth, there is a dip in self-esteem, generally speaking, and that this dip then continues, if you like, until the child is about 36 months old. Now, these are obviously averages, and it doesn't happen to everybody by any means, but it is research that some women do report a loss of identity and or a lack of self-esteem. So I suppose because it's so generalized in their life, it's going to affect their riding if they're one of those women in that category. Although the research group didn't tend to look after the baby was 3 years old and had become a toddler, they did then look at a second child and the effect of a second child, and they found that the baseline had gone back up. So in other words, the women had recovered their self-esteem, and some women then maintained that self-esteem, and some women again experienced that dip with the second child and so on. So it does seem to be something physiological or psychological in some women. So that's statistically proven for some women, but I keep emphasizing some women, certainly not all women. And I always say, if you're unsure whether this is a psychological effect in some way, and you're trying to figure it all out, just take yourself back and think about when we were hunter-gatherers, when we lived in tribes, and think what a woman in that tribe would have experienced and why it may have been an advantage or a disadvantage and so on. Because usually that's where we find our answers, because we've still got the same brain as the humans of several thousand years ago. So if you think about that kind of society, a woman there would be less brave, maybe that would be the word, and so would be more inclined to stay in the camp and look after the child rather than abandon the child and go off and, start gathering berries or something like that and leave the child completely unattended. So it does have kind of like a biological reason behind it, if you like. What we need to realize is that we in the 21st century don't need to be tied to the camp, and we don't need to have that tribal identity, and we don't need to think solely of survival of the tribe quite so much. That we live in a very different society. But you can see the reason why it would be useful in those kind of civilizations, that it would plant the woman back with the baby so that the baby was far more likely to survive. I have to say, though, that confidence or self-esteem does rise after that window. So it's not a permanent thing. So then it becomes more of a conditioned thing, something that we've habitually done and got used to. So then it changes, the reasons change, and then we're on to patterning. We're on to, well, I've done this for so long, I'll just keep running this same pattern, a bit like a computer runs the same software until we delete the software or we update it. And that's exactly what we do with our own brains. Just as part of your question, you mentioned whether or not this was occurring because we age. And I just wanted to address that because lots of people have the idea that as you age, you naturally lose confidence. And that's a myth again. If you're watching the Olympics at the moment, there's plenty of ladies doing some pretty hair-raising riding, and they're certainly not getting less and less confident as they age. Very often, again, that is presupposed. Lots of people have learnt that this happens to you, and so they're kind of following that pattern that they've been taught. So you've accepted, one has accepted, not you personally, but one has accepted this as a given, as a truth, and almost educated our mind to go along with it and to live up to it, if you like. So it doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with aging in any way. And I think that's true for me as well. You know, I think statistically, if you were going to ask people, did they feel more confident at a certain age? I think that my confidence in riding, certainly, once I got over my nerves and once I learned the tips and tricks that I learned many years ago, and if I need to use them, I use them, then I don't get dips in confidence. So maybe that's something to bear in mind as well. Now, my next question is from Ross. Now, Ross is going to come on the podcast in a few weeks' time. Ross, I would take me all day to explain everything that Ross does. He's a behaviourist, but he works on so many other levels with horses as well. He's absolutely phenomenal. And it's some of his clients that have asked him questions. And so this is the first question from Ross's client. So, my thought patterns around my horse focuses more on the aspects she doesn't do than what she does do. Are there any mindset tips to break this cycle? So I suppose it's a what if, isn't it? It's what if she rears, or what if she bucks, or what if she spooks, and not living in the moment as such. And I'm sure because Ross is so good with neurology of horses and neurology of people and working together, I know that Ross will have worked hard with this client, or is working hard with this client, to make it possible for the client to live more and more in the moment. Because when we're in the moment, we're focused on, generally speaking, what's happening now, and we can avert what's going to happen if something does happen, or we can get out of the way. So I'm not saying that you stop a spook happening or you stop some instantaneous reaction by a horse, although you may do if you're nice and calm. But horses are liable to do unpredictable things. But you are in a mindset when you're in the moment and you're feeling calmer about what's going on in this particular nanosecond. Because you're calm, the reaction of you and your neurology is more likely to be effective, and possibly, as I say, Ross will be the expert here, that of your horse is more likely to be less explosive. So I suppose it's a question about how to be in the moment and how to stay there, because we all know we should be there most of the time. And yes, we might have in our mind, let's say you've got on a horse and you know this horse bucks at a certain trigger, then you would know what could potentially happen. but you're not time traveling and living in that future moment. You're living in the now with a very sensible level of safety and self-protection. So that living in the now sometimes comes about when you start to switch off the conscious mind. And the conscious mind is the one that's telling you this might happen and the other might happen and something else could happen. And, the horse feels a bit lively today, and interpreting that in a certain way instead of interpreting that, your horse got out of bed on the right side and is actually quite willing and able to do what you want to do together. So distracting the conscious mind might be as simple as counting footfall and aligning it with your breathing. So in for 4, out for 4, and you can then concentrate on whether this is rhythmical. Can you keep the horse in a rhythmical pace? Because you'll be very conscious of your breathing and the timing. Can you then change it if you get a bit bored to in for 5, out for 5? And if you want to go a little bit quicker, maybe it's in for 6 and out for 6. Anything at all that keeps your mind occupied. And we've mentioned going into peripheral vision before, because peripheral vision is a superb way to ride. Your mind is alert. It knows exactly what's going on. It's very much in the moment, however, and calm. So if you want to know more about that peripheral vision, it's called Hakalau, particular peripheral vision that I use, and I will pop a link to that podcast in the description box. So I think that will help, certainly as a starting point. Another way of staying in the moment that some people like, some people don't like the breathing bit, and some people find the Hakalau needs a lot of practice, if you like, off the horse before you start doing on the horse. One other thing is almost a hypnotic mantra. And you say to yourself, I'm all right now, and now, and now, and now, and I'm all right now, and now, and now. And so what you're doing is you're breathing because you're having to speak. You're concentrating on the words. So you're getting your conscious mind out of the way. And it is a little bit dreamy and calming. I'm all right now, and now, and now. And you're also telling your unconscious mind, you're telling that part of the mind where the emotions are, the amygdala, you're telling that part that you are okay and you're fine. So it's soothing and reassuring. So that's a nice way of staying in the moment. Now, Ross has a second client question and it's linked, so I thought it'd be quite nice to put them together. So the question is, what have you found to be the most common reason of a person having concerns about riding, but is very at home once they're in the saddle? Now, this is so common, isn't it? This is the build-up, the anticipation worry. This is, I'm okay once I'm doing it. And very often this is outside of riding as well. This might be, going for a job interview, standing up to present. It's the thought of the process between now and actually doing it. And we work ourselves up so much. So again, I think there's an anticipatory nerve podcast. Yes, there is. And so I'll put the link down there, but very quickly, what's happening in the mind is, again, we've time traveled. We've gone into the future and we've decided that this future thing is that we're going to have some kind of disaster. So we've projected ourselves. We've taken the worst case scenario. We're absolutely out of the moment. We are not in the moment. We're in a frame of mind where we are not doing probably what we should be doing. So if you're trying to concentrate at work and your stomach is doing flips because you're going to ride later on, you're not concentrating on your work. And so you've got out of being in the moment. You've taken your focus miles away. So again, it would be things to keep you in the moment, depending on what your activity is right now before you ride. It may be that you use the Hakalau. It may be that you do something to distract your conscious mind. It may be that you start to use the little trick where you think of 15 minutes after the ride. So you do project yourself a little bit further into the future, but with a caveat that everything has gone well. So you imagine 15 minutes after the ride, you've got off, you put your horse away, maybe you put your tack away, and you're walking on air because it's gone well. And if you can think of it going 100% well, then all the anxiety will drop. If you can think of it going 90% well, then you just have that little space for some anxiety. So it's a way of reducing the nerves. It's not a way of predicting and saying this is going to be how it happens, or it's not a way of crafting it or forcing it or manifesting it or anything like that. The sole purpose of this is to drop the nerves in this moment when you're not actually probably at the stables, not actually riding. So project yourself 15 minutes into the future. Imagine the ride's gone really well. And you'll know when you do this technique correctly because the nerves drop like a stone. So if you're not quite there yet, you need to imagine more. You need to imagine the feeling of having completed that ride really well. Everything's gone well and successfully on whatever your measure of success might be. Time for one more question. As I say, if I haven't got around to your question today, I will get around to it in another podcast. It might be the next one or the one after that. Okay, so this one's from Anita. What's a good technique for competitions to get you into the mindset of trying to win and believing that you have a chance? The context is that I often arrive at a competition, feel myself giving up before I start, as I think everyone else looks better. Also, I think we ride more positively when having a go to win rather than sometimes being a bit half-hearted, and it's better for the horse. Within reason, I don't mean to take crazy risks. I have to dig deep to talk myself into a competitive mindset as I find it too easy to settle for a clear round. A technique to get fired up would be great. Wow. Okay. So let's dip into a bit of sport psychology, just a little bit outside of NLP for a moment. So lots of people compete in sports where they do need to have some fire in their belly. So there are a few little practices that you can incorporate to make yourself feel a little bit more competitive. So for example, if you have a chore to do, cleaning the house, time yourself. How long does it normally take you to clean a room? Keep that figure in mind, and the next time you do it, try and do it faster. And anything like that where it's safe to do a bit quicker, think about how you can make yourself competitive against yourself, so that you start to be more competitive generally. You can also think about extending some things to make yourself feel more competitive. So this is just an example. You might be able to think of others, but if you go into a plank position, let's say, and let's just say a person could keep in plank for 10 seconds, and then you've got to lower your knees. Well, then go for 12 seconds, 15, 20, 25, and, start to be more and more competitive against yourself and bettering your own records, if you like. I think as well, if you see competition as something where you improve yourself, because if you think of it as the ultimate training and that your competitors are there to teach you something and to help you up your game, then you can think of competition in terms of being in a place where you can test out your ability and you get feedback for yourself. And competition can be the ideal place to get that feedback in knowing where you need to concentrate your efforts. And it highlights it, doesn't it? It puts it under such a microscope when you compete, the areas that you need more practice at. And that can be quite cruel as well. So we need to look at it in a positive light. This is the ultimate feedback. And every competition, if you compete, and I mean be competitive, is therefore an opportunity to learn as well. And so sometimes it's having those goals that also spur us on and make us feel more competitive. And just like anything else, too much of a good thing isn't good for us. So we don't want to be striving and having this as the only option. So the only option is that I come in the top 3. And if I don't, then I'm going to feel really bad. That would be kind of going again through the wrong threshold. But to feel that you want to compete, that you want to compete against yourself, and because the field could be very different each time that you go to compete, or you might be competing at a tricky venue or a venue where the course builder puts in some real curveballs. So if you compete against yourself, first of all, but also with a mind to what other people are doing and you're learning from those other people. So you see it a chance to really reflect on the areas that you can celebrate and also the areas that you can work on. And we're talking about keeping it nice and healthy in terms of your mindset and just, feeling that you're in it, therefore, rather than a bystander. One other thing to think about is your training at home. You can make that competitive. You can make that focused so that you feel focused when you're training at home. And so it's a natural thing for you to feel focused when you are training at a competition or competing at a competition. And it's the same with resilience, that you build your resilience when you're training at home, and then it's easier to bounce back from any setbacks. And I suppose the ultimate thing to focus on if you want to be more competitive and you want to have that winning mindset is really to think about the fact that competing is making you a so much better rider. And the more that you are invested in the process of the competition, the better you'll get and the more quickly you'll get there. And that might be just a little reframe to think about and just to try on and see if that helps you to get that oomph in your competition. So as I said, we've still got some more questions to come for next time or the time afterwards. Thank you so much for listening. And if you do have any questions that I haven't got round to answering, any extra questions, just send them to me because maybe I can expand it into a whole podcast episode. And that would just be fantastic. So take care for now, and I'll see you all again really soon.